about by the COVID-19 pandemic, and as our industry faces major disruption. We are witnessing significant change in how we make, share, and experience art through technology. In today's session, you're going to hear from two artists embracing technological change during these extraordinary times and hear how moving to the digital can enrich our creative community. This month's Experimenta, as Nikki said, we're partnered with Melbourne Arts Festival Next Wave to consider the potential for radical change. They'll be launching their program later this week and have asked their artists to adapt their performances and events to the online platforms, creating live streaming performances, social media gatherings, and podcast discussions. This necessary change in the face of lockdown restrictions has generated new perspectives and practices and kept conversations and experiences thriving for audiences. You're about to hear from two Next Wave artists who will discuss the ways they have adapted their works that were not initially intended for the digital realm. How they'll talk about how they're reaching wider audiences online and how these digital platforms can be used for a vehicle for activism and creative expression. The first of our speakers is Florence Folole Tupuola. She's an Aotearoa-born, Samoan-raised, interdisciplinary artist and activist working on the lands of the Wiradjuri Nation in Naarm, Melbourne. She explores cultural identity and belonging through Samoan dance called Siva Samoa. She has performed in professional dance groups internationally and across Australia, most recently at the National Multicultural Festival. A former recipient of Footscray Community Arts Centre's Emerging Cultural Leaders program, she was able to delve into her passion for social justice, creative healing, and community engagement through that program. She's facilitated art workshops and events across Melbourne, Canberra, and Samoa for community groups and non-profit organisations such as Arts of the Pacific, Glenroy Sporting Club, and ANU Pacifica Australia. Her interactive and collaborative works have been exhibited at activist events such as the Activist Arts Festival. Her ongoing solo project outlines her advocacy for child rights and involvement with child justice organisations such as Samoa Victim Support Group. She's brought her passion for the arts to the climate change movement by joining Pacific Climate Warriors, sharing collaborative storytelling works in both Melbourne and Sydney. So please make Florence very welcome. And over to you, Florence.
Jonathan, and thank you, Nikki. Welcome. Joining in from my home here. I just want to double check that. Sorry there. Welcome again. Joining in from my home, I acknowledge that we are joining together on sacred land, 60,000 years of rich culture and songlines of the First Nations people, protectors of the land and waterways. I am a settler who stands on the Wathawarang people's land of the Kulin Nation, offering again a moment for you all to acknowledge where we all stand. I acknowledge that we are on stolen land and that sovereignty was never ceded for traditional owners, paying homage to the elders before us, with us, and ascending future leaders to come. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. New Wayfinders is first and foremost a community for solidarity between Pacific people. looking to reclaim and explore their cultural identity through art based on the Kulin Nations. The group acts as a platform for Oceanic artists using creativity to reclaim identity, build community, and agency and self-representation. Founded by Fijian leaders Aliki Reid and co-founder Yashabel Kirkau. New Wayfinders Collective response to Next Wave's theme, Governance of Artists, was inspired by the Samoan phrase Whaiwhai Mu, going forward slowly and very gently. It asks audiences and yourself to slow right down and contemplate the severity and choices of their actions and ours. Reflecting on our discomfort and criticism around colonization and Australia's political system. The collective brought together a Siva Samoa dancer, Peter Lemalu, a Samoan painter, Yashabel Kirkau, a Fijian weaver, and Auntie Vicky Kinai, a Papua New Guinean master weaver and respected elder. Our vision was reclaiming the past and inhabiting the present as Pacific people living in displaced contexts, presenting oceanic works that draw on their woven experiences of Indigenous knowledge, sharing through oral traditions. Oral histories have shaped communities and strengthened people's responsibility in sustaining cultural practices. Together, we are reconnecting with our ancestors through the movement of our hands when creating siva, weaving, painting, and storytelling. Understanding the motions and processes of using our hands to serve, respect, and remember. So with your free hand, move it or motion it backwards. Motion of your hands moving backwards is you acknowledging your ancestors in the past. And then motion your hands forward. It's like when you're carving into the wood, marking of the skin, weaving in and out, all represents the acts of bringing them in the present. And bring your free hands in front of you. That all said, to work with your hands is to become your ancestor, our ancestors. So thank you, Jonathan, for the brief intro. And I guess I'll just kind of dwell a little bit about my journey with Siva Samoa and how it came about. This is a picture of my childhood upbringing. Just, typical 40-degree heat was the norms, and it's like the best Australian grown oranges you can find around here. As a first generation Aotearoa born Samoan migrant, raised in regional areas of Australia, my connection to Samoan culture and community came during my adulthood. From the swift guidance of youth and needed elders, I was able to find groundness, build strong values, and believe through the significant teachings of Siva Samoa as a gateway for unlearning and learning. This paved the way to finding strength with my identity, self-healing, and how I choose to navigate. It connected me to family, sisterhood, a teacher, and returning to my motherland. I later navigated into activist realms such as the climate movement, where Indigenous and First Nations people can too thrive and heal the world. To speak and share our narratives in an authentic and peaceful warrior-like manner. For I, calling on the beautiful power of Pacific diaspora here in Australia, together with the interconnectedness of ocean people. Exploring in contemporary art spaces has influenced the greater reach of bringing complex issues to fruition, where ongoing criticism, broader learning, and findings is unapologetically manifest to works of growth and activism, It made me be proud of how complex of a diaspora and artist I am. I notice I see when I'm sharing these photos with you is that I stand not alone, of pride and strength when I'm together with community. Whaiwhai Le Mu project was radically affected by COVID, illustrated through my hand movements that you will see shortly. Watch as it moves rapidly and without thought. As a collective, we were upset. A year of planning and celebration of intimate work immediately put on hold. The rush of productivity, immediate transition to a platform was an issue for artists and works that have been built and in collaboration and solidarity with our community. It limited artists with no experience or skills to keep up and adapt with these changes. The adaptation to digital space plus social distancing raised questions as to how traditional knowledge can thrive when it heavily evolves around physical and spiritual interactions with one. This should not be excluded. The pandemic added another strike to the already neglected art industry by the Morrison government. It impacted artists' sustainable income and security, causing radical unemployment and mistreatment. In isolation, the mental health and well-being of non-working artists was and is greatly impacted. Depression and grief was hugely felt by many struggling to cope with everything, such as myself. It greatly exposed the limited connectivity of remote and isolated communities and groups here across Australia and in the Pacific. The work we produced and paid direct homage to oral traditions, providing it on an online platform was a difficult space to manage. More questions, consultation, and research needed to be dealt with when sharing or not sharing cultural practices for the protection of the storyteller and the storytelling. Can oral tradition live and thrive on a digital platform? Not all challenges have immediately brought forward changes, as it is still a slow and personal process for artists to navigate in. So be mindful and empathetic. Take the time to strengthen the healing process. During COVID pandemic, the challenges brought opportunities to adapt and stand in resilience, to slow down like the movements of my hands now and contemplate our actions with grace and sense of direction. More awareness on mental health, and well-being of artists needs to be discussed and conversed openly, acknowledging that the struggles faced is real and shouldn't be in isolation. COVID brought families and communities together. Being together during a crisis brings awareness to the importance of being safe and at home with loved ones. Being in a collective, such as New Wayfinders, pays homage to that. And I'm grateful to be cared for, be in strength, and to support a community care. The digital platform ability to support and help engage people during these times reflected on their acknowledgement of how important community and interconnectedness is greatly needed now. Traditional knowledge is a resistance who continue to adapt and thrive. Communities see the resilience of connecting with each other through ongoing trade and exchange of sustainable and cultural practices. During times of crisis, Indigenous practices are greatly needed for communities to prosper with compassion, unity, strength for one another. It revealed how essential this is for our communities, but also the values and beliefs to lean on. As an emerging artist, I was greatly impacted by this personally. I hope these times will reveal to people how important it is that stories of Pacific diaspora are intimately shared and of matter. The challenges faced with the protection of storytelling and storytellers has provided needed critical thinking and assessment by the community, stating clear and concise guidelines to a global audience. The slow and delicate process authenticates the work greatly, bringing together collaboration, consultation, and in-depth research with our elders, youth, strengthening the power of Indigenous people speaking their own narratives. Storytellers also have the power during these times to also say no, and that is okay and respected. Observing the movements of the hands from challenges to opportunity and adaptation reveals that to you all, that during these times, I hope we all take the time to reflect on our emotions and processes of using our hands to serve, respect, and remember. An ancestor to few is one for all. And lastly, Whai le mu. Kaftai lava, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Now, my mic is on. Florence, for that presentation. Also, to all of our participants out there that are watching the panel, just a little reminder, it'd be great if you would acknowledge the country that you're logging on from. And also a reminder that at the end of our presentations, there will be an opportunity for some questions. So feel free to write your questions and I'll moderate that discussion at the end of the session. So now I'd like to introduce our second speaker. Born on unceded Awabakal country, which is Newcastle in New South Wales, Dez Chandler is an interdisciplinary storyteller, creating work traversing words, performance, events, sound, video, photography, and technologies. She has a background in human rights and advocacy building, using documentary filmmaking and radio as her principal mediums. In May last year, Dez was one of 5 storytellers to be asked to perform at London Union Chapel as part of the Moth's prestigious main stage event. Her work has been presented in Australia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Portugal, Spain, Germany, the US, the UK, Iran, Turkey, Palestine, Brazil, and throughout Central America. Today, Dez's main interest lies in subject matter that flirts with the surreal and unknown, or challenges preconceived socio-cultural or political notions to create instances of engagement or points of connection between unlikely parties. So without further ado, I can see some people from the Gubby Gubby people's land logging in, which is great. And we have someone from Brazil, but in Australia. So Dez, over to you.
Hi, everybody. I hope this is working. This is my first Zoom presentation. Many thanks to Experimenta Arts and to Next Wave for inviting me to speak alongside Florence. And wow, Florence, it was amazing. I'm really moved and affected by what you said. Thank you for being so brave in what you shared and sharing so many insights and personal revelations. Very inspiring and very nourishing stuff. feel incredibly out of my depth following you, to be honest, but mine's much more of a family slideshow in comparison. So apologies, and I hope you can all bear with me. Well, this talk comes from my living room with the kitchen in the background. I did do a little bit of a panic clean, but more importantly, it comes to you from the unceded lands of the Boonwurrung and the Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, where I now live and work. And as Jonathan mentioned, I'm new to Melbourne. I was born and raised on Awabakal country, Newcastle. And then I suppose, like all respectable, rebellious, angst-ridden teenagers, I couldn't wait to live the life of Virginia Woolf's essay and get a room of my own, so to speak. So I spent much of my adult life living on country belonging to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I think it's really important to mention all of these places because for me, anyway, the different spaces and the different environments where I've lived have had a very formative impact on my perspective and therefore on my work. But yes, it's a real privilege to be a settler here on Aboriginal land and to grow and to learn and live alongside the oldest living and longest continuing culture, always was and always will be. So before I delve into the work that I was preparing for Next Wave alongside an absolutely incredible team and talk about how the Government of Artists theme of their pre-COVID curated festival resonated with all of us, I thought I should probably start by talking a little bit about the work that I do and what inspires it. Also, you've probably noticed by now that I have a bit of a thing for lurid colours and bold text. It's been a bit of an affliction really for many years. It's determined the treatment of many a presentation slide. So my apologies, there's more of them coming, like this one, if it works. Yeah, it did work, okay, good. So I'm a person who's had a real zigzag of a career trajectory. I've had lots of different jobs and worked on lots of different projects, but they've all had two things in common. They've all involved some kind of storytelling, and apart from a short-lived stint as a youngster in an advertising agency, they've all been motivated by themes of human rights, social justice, and community. So I've been very fortunate in my life, and I was very fortunate to spend a number of years in occupied Palestine, learning from and working alongside refugee communities, artists, academics, and thinkers. And I was able to apply some of the skills that I'd acquired through my background in media work to develop written pieces, radio, and video workshops. This is a picture of some of the individuals that I was working with on a project called Radio Largi. And also some video works and some documentary films. And I just want to talk quickly about one of those, which is a feature that I'm extremely passionate about, and I've been working on it for years, but it's currently been shelved. But it's constantly on my mind and on my back. I've had to put it on hold because a person who was very instrumental, very significant to my story, and I don't mean by story, I mean my personal life, not the story of the film itself, although I'm sure many of you will agree that when it comes to arts work, and certainly the work of independent documentary filmmaking, those things are deeply entangled. But they were involved in the project diagnosed with terminal cancer and recently passed away. And that grief really threw me. And I'm bringing that up because I think it's relevant to the topic of discussion today. Because as we all know, unpredictable things are happening in our lives constantly, and they affect us in ways that we can't anticipate. And all of these things set us on different courses, which brings me to the project, which, thanks to Next Wave, thanks to Punctum Inc., to Darabin Speakeasy and the Graham F. Smith Peace Foundation, I've had the opportunity to develop alongside an amazing interdisciplinary team, including Safta Ahmed, Eloise Chandler, Warren Armstrong, Catherine Clark, Edwin Montgomery, Ahmed Salama, Boris Bagatini, Isabella Andronis, and many, many more. The project, with some really beautiful key art you can see there, created by very talented artist and designer Ahmed Salama, is called The Parallel Effect. And it's a fusion of immersive theatre and participatory installation. Pre-COVID, it was set to premiere as part of Next Wave at the Northcote Town Hall last week. You may remember seeing the words reluctant misanthrope and aspiring optimist on a previous lurid coloured slide. And I guess in many ways, this project, I wanted to try and channel whatever I could to inspire the latter. So the premise of the project, of the Parallel Effect, is that a group of renegade scientists attached to the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva found a rift in time and space, and that rift has enabled them to access a series of parallel dimensions. These worlds feature many of the same players and many of the same pivotal events that have happened in our timeline, but they differ because at a critical point in the 1980s, these parallel worlds break away from the course of events that have played out in our reality. Because in these other worlds, knowledge of the greenhouse effect in the 70s and 80s was actioned, and therefore many of today's catastrophic realities of climate change have been mitigated in these other worlds. So a key part of our creative process in building this new work and imagining what these parallel worlds might look like has been thinking about what sustainability means from the perspective of knowledge and from the perspective of knowledge and ideas. So a massive part of our development process has been looking across virtual and physical repositories, including activist archives, governmental archives, scientific, organisational, international, and local archives. And what we've found in doing that is that so much of today's knowledge and debate on climate change, including what we can do to mitigate climate change, has become ungrounded from historical records. It omits reference to the intellectual, social, cultural, scientific, and organisational ideas and labour of our predecessors, of our elders. So with this work, we're striving to move away from this trend. We're striving to move away from the disposable economy of memory and move away from a one-use commodification of ideas. So how the show is intended to work is that once you go through the wormhole, which is a pretty theatrical, pretty trippy sensory experience, you arrive at a museum, which we're calling the Multiverse Museum. And inside this space, you get to interact with a range of artifacts. Some of them are shared across the dimensions. Others have very different climatic, political, institutional, natural, technological, and social evolutions. So in terms of attempting to nourish the optimist inside all of us, we're hoping that audiences will feel inspired or empowered to spend some time contemplating alternative paths and futures, and that in doing that, they can then use that sustenance to interrogate the histories and the realities of today's climate crisis and rethink and imagine possibilities for informed, sustainable, democratic interventions in the future. But then COVID-19, and as Florence said, it was a real shock. And I, like most members of the team and most artists that I know, was in denial for quite a while. I feel like it's been extraordinarily beneficial to have the support and sensitivity from Next Wave for both the sustainability of the project and my mental health in general. Because, you know, since the pandemic has become the new reality, the uncertainty surrounding the life of this project, something which we had been developing for over 12 months, has just been incredibly unsettling. And it's felt unbelievably odd and really, as I wrote to Bron not that long ago, odd and unsettling to suddenly just hit the brakes when the project, you know, leading into our premiere presentation, had naturally found some pure momentum and it was really flourishing. So yes, having the support and the sensitivity from Next Wave to have the opportunity to say, yes, I want to try and rethink and adapt or work out a way that I could not necessarily produce the same work, but perhaps elements of the world of the work or something that sort of speaks to aspects of the work, for me has been really empowering. And I think it's also been a really positive thing for everyone involved in the project. And as producer and lead artist on this project, I've felt a massive sense of responsibility to all of the amazing members of the team who have all been, you know, wholeheartedly committed and have given so much throughout this development phase. So I really felt that it was important that we had something to sort of buoy us and to feel like, you know, all this sort of ramping up of adrenaline and all this energy that had been injected into the realization of this thing, for want of a better word, I'm so articulate, would actually, you know, amount to something that we could celebrate at the end. So we're very grateful to have had the opportunity to be able to rethink, regroup, and work out what we could produce for Next Wave's COVID festival, or sorry, not a festival, it's an assembly, it's Assemble. And so, you know, that's been really wonderful for us. But I'd also like to acknowledge here that I'm, you know, I've been very fortunate to be in a position where that's been possible and where I can try to adapt to these changing circumstances. I know that it's not a luxury that other artists have had for a variety of reasons. So in terms of how we have adapted our project or elements of the world of the project for Assemble, one of the things that we did was produce a zine. And this is a really beautiful idea, and it was kind of riffing off that really lovely, nourishing idea that Next Wave had about sort of providing care packages to artists, to stakeholders of the festival, to supporters of our community. Because I think that one of the things that has certainly happened as a result of this enforced isolation is that it's become even more paramount the importance of connectivity, the importance of touch, of I guess, analog forms of communication. And I'm actually noticing how that's informing and changing the way people are using digital modes of communication. So for instance, I was a massive enthusiast of what at that time was being called new media. I believed that the internet was going to mark a democratization of media, and it was going to enable people to actually make some quite strident shifts away from some of the dominant narratives and institutions determining the way we have to live, the way we have to think and interact. I think what we've seen in recent years is that actually the internet has taken many of those same dominant voices and narratives and hidden behind sort of avatars. We've all drunk the Kool-Aid and are sort of, presenting these shiny edited versions of a brand new speak and vernacular that, has become the norm. And, I know that this isn't I could talk too long about this and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but I also feel like words like and sort of following are all things that sort of promote an idea of popularism that I don't know is necessarily something that that idealistically and ideologically really promotes tenets of being that are important and are sustainable. So I'm hoping that if something positive comes from this pandemic, it might be a return to a more sort of authentic type of communication. And even if that communication has to happen online for a bit longer until it is safe to actually sort of venture outside once again and interact, I'm hoping that the language that we use online when we're talking to each other is actually going to come from a place of the heart and not from some veneer of an avatar. So in terms of the projects that our group has been putting together for Assemble, we put together a zine, and I mentioned this was inspired by Next Wave's fantastic idea of putting together care packages. So we thought, well, what can we give to people as part of that care package that is of the world of our project, the Parallel Effect that we've been building, but also is something that sort of speaks to our current reality of COVID-19 and isolation. And what could be something that could maybe be positive or nourishing during these relatively bleak times. And we thought perhaps a COVID-19 pandemic safe wormhole generator that attempts to, I guess, harness everyone's inner creativity and imagination and enable it to sort of go free and dream of sort of better systems, structures and hierarchies or lack of hierarchies so that we can create better worlds. So Warren Armstrong sent through this amazing draft for a do-it-yourself wormhole generator, and we worked together on that draft, and we used Ahmed's magnificent key art for our show, and then I put together some sort of very silly images that I think some of the references are quite obscure and then others are not. Like there is one of a very, very silly, there you go. I don't think I need to tell you what that is. Anyway, so I did some really sort of weird drawings and yeah, we have a zine, which has been really exciting. I also worked with the composer of our show, Edwin Montgomery, on taking one of the pieces of music that was going to be performed by two extraordinary trumpet players and Edwin in our live show. And we developed it so that it became a piece solely for violin. And this was a piece of music that was going to be presented at the beginning of our show, in the section where we're leaving this world, this perceived reality. And it was a period of lamentation, a moment of pause to reflect on anthropogenic climate change, excuse me, and all of the disasters that have occurred on our world as a result of human intervention. So it's quite a sad piece of video work, but I suppose that's also present in the title. It's called Lament. It's a work that explores in chronological order, using and drawing on a lot of the research that we did into sort of key, beats that have been made that have really worsened the climate disaster. And it reflects on that, and it ruminates on that, and sort of ruminates on this period of pandemic pause and human behaviour in general. So we're going to be premiering this video work as part of Assemble soon, but I thought I'd just finish up my talk today with a very short excerpt from the video. So just bear with me 1 second as I work out how to get this to work. Are you seeing that? No, sorry. Sorry, everybody. Thanks. That's all I've got. Thank you.
So, sorry, my mic was off there. Hey, Dez and Florence, would you come back on the screen? Because we've got a little bit of time for questions. If people who have joined us have more questions, you've got a little bit of time left if you want to type one in, and I'll read it out. But Dez, there's a question for you. Where are you? There you are. So there's a question from Tama about about some of your when you were talking about your background, and she was interested to know what drew you to Israel and Palestine. And she's asked, can you tell us more about your experience on the land over there? And that I've been there a lot for research, and I think it's a very complicated situation. I'm interested in hearing more about your experience.
Okay, well, thanks so much for the question, Tamar. I actually don't find the situation there complicated. To me, it's about apartheid and genocide, and I find it an incredibly clear situation. I also appreciate that I've been unbelievably lucky to have spent time on that land in the first place, because so many Palestinian refugees can't even access that land. But I don't really want to Shanghai our discussion today with a conversation about Palestine. I could do that another time. But
yeah, I mean, we could easily spend a whole session on just that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Look, there's another question that's come up to both of you from Victoria. What do you think is the future of interactive media post-COVID?
Oh, golly.
Sorry, what was that?
Oh, that's a great question, Victoria. Oh, I need a moment to think about that.
Do you have I guess one of the things that I'm interested in, you've touched on this a little bit, is how much, in thinking about how you might translate both of your planned works for Next Wave in very different forms, as you've described. And Flo, perhaps you could talk a little bit more about what was essentially an exhibition and how what elements you're now presenting and how you're presenting them for Next Wave. But have you learnt new things about the investigation that was at the basis of the works as you had planned them, by thinking about how you might translate it in a different way?
I know one of the essential elements to the work was having that intimate and spiritual connection with people, and creating that space and environment. And I think that's a really key part in terms of storytelling. You want to create this safe and space for people to feel open about what they're being offered and the stories that are being shared, and to have that space to reflect and think about. And so how does that look on digital platform?
Well, it's interesting you're talking about that, Flo, because one of the things I picked up in your presentation, you raised the question of how can oral traditions survive in a digital platform. And I thought that, to me, and you're touching on this now again, what do you think might be lost? Is it what you're talking about, that kind of the physicality and how important that is in terms of spiritual connection? Is that something that's lost, or can it be translated?
I think it can, but it also depends on like, because this is all like on a virtual platform, like how can we be sure that everyone has the same access and same connection to these stories being shared on a platform? And I mean, it doesn't restrict all oral traditions. I know there are practices and stories that are freely shared, and I think that just comes to the responsibility of the storyteller and the duty it is when you do share stories and do share these knowledges, that you're also taking in account the huge kind of, I guess not huge, but the responsibility of that. So I think it's just taking that in account. I think personally, I know that there are some knowledges that can only be passed down within families, and I think that's just something that to be considered.
So when you say passed down in families, is that a problem then, doing that virtually? Does it need to be in the physical presence? Because obviously the Pacific diaspora now, many of your community is dispersed. Family members are dispersed, across Australia, across the Pacific. So can those things be handed down virtually over a Zoom link or something like that, or does it need to be in person?
I think it's the conversations and discussions are needed to be, I guess, openly shared amongst everyone, and whether that comes to actually sharing those sacred and intimate stories, that's just depending on the storyteller. So like, I have no kind of right to say what is like you can't share or not share. It's but I think there needs to be more open kind of discussions as to how we can like navigate that and what that looks like collectively. So I think it's important that interconnectedness and the conversations between elders and youth, Pacific diaspora, and also brothers and sisters in the Pacific are having these organic and shared talanoas, or just conversations.
And so Dez, you talked a little bit about how you've adapted the content. I was struck by the parallel universe you're trying to create in the work as actually happening with COVID. So I feel like there's another work there post-COVID on the same theme. But can you talk a little bit about what you discovered around the content you were exploring that was essentially performance, and in adapting that, what you discovered?
Well, paradoxically, I think for me, I sort of come from a more digital and screen-based background. So this work was actually about moving into a more immersive theatre and experiential space. So it's been really interesting. I don't know if someone's trying to tell me something, but so I guess when our group was sort of thinking about what we might be able to do, I suppose one of the positives that came out of it was it really sort of reinforced the importance of that sustainable knowledge element that I was speaking to earlier, and the fact that a massive part of what we were hoping to do underpinning the work was to make education and access to archives and to previous sort of knowledge and understanding more accessible. So we've been talking to Next Wave about presenting some of those things as part of Assemble on our website, which as of last night is now almost ready to go. There's a couple of bugs still there, but it's almost ready to sort of be presented to everyone. And we actually have some extraordinary assets online that are, that have been sourced from international and local archives, from physical and virtual repositories. And they're really, really mind-blowing things that we're very, very excited to share and to put out there for people to interact with and explore at their own time. So yes, I think it has been a really interesting opportunity to kind of unpack the project once again and actually ask, well, what are the key ingredients underlaying or sort of fueling the project that we really want audiences to take away with them? So I think one of those things is access to knowledge. Obviously, that has always sort of been a big part of the work, and we're able to provide elements of that now in a different form, but still to explore it and deliver it.
Okay. So look, we're actually almost right on time, but there's two questions that have come through that we'll just go a little bit over time to give you an opportunity to respond. One from Raphael, and he's interested to know whether either of you are planning to or have worked with your art/activism in VR formats or platforms. And if so, has the corona crisis influenced that? Do you think VR can be a good tool or not, and why?
Yeah, I've never really considered VR, and personally, I've looked at works that that include VR, and it's like stunning. It's it's such a beyond like next level kind of like space to like bring like a 360 of your work into that platform. So I think I would, I guess, wow. Yeah, I might think about that. I might think about that, yeah.
I think both augmented reality and virtual reality applications are fantastic for activist application. And there's so many examples of how both of those modes of technology have been put to use. One project that I actually did have a bit to do with was once again, it was inside occupied Palestine, and it was to do with the wall that separates Palestinians from people on the other side of the wall. And because there are obviously Palestinians on that side of the wall too, so it's a very weird situation. But what this project did was, and it was by an artist, Mark Swarek, it actually gave people the tools using their phones from either the Israeli vantage point of the wall or the Palestinian vantage point of the wall to actually look through a particular section of the wall and see what was on the other side.
Yeah.
So I think there are, and I mean that's just one example. There are so many, and I think there are amazing modes of technology that can be tapped into and utilised. And now that technology itself is becoming more affordable and is incredibly accessible, then yeah, I think the more modes and the more mediums, the better.
Cool. And one last question, and this is to you, Flo, from Natalie. Can you speak more to your thoughts and discussions on the protections needed for stories and storytellers?
I think there's, it's just the respect between the exchange of elders passed down to youth, and I think it's just being mindful that like not all stories need to be shared on such a global platform or needs to be accessed. I think that's, you know, sometimes cultural practices and traditional knowledge has always thrived through just sharing within the family and it continuing. And I think that's why I think Siva Samoa has always been so resilient, is that it continues to pass the practices and knowledge from one generation to another. And it just brings longevity to the knowledge being shared of Indigenous people and that culture thriving. So yeah. Do I need to?
No, and I think that in itself is deeply challenging to those cultures that have a kind of core belief that everything is accessible to them and should be. So I think you've answered that really well. Well, look, we've gone way over time. We could probably keep talking all afternoon, but a big thank you to both of you for coming and presenting at Experimenta Social Distancing. I wish you well with the rollout of your projects for Next Wave. And I also hope that we get a chance in the future to see the original visions for both of your projects presented. Once things, well, we'll see how normal everything comes back to. But yeah, I really hope we get an opportunity to do that. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Nikki.
Thanks, Florence. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Nikki.
See you later.
Enjoy my community care package.
Yeah, cool.
From Next Wave. Thank you.
See you later. Till next